Hello and welcome to Peace, the podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Peace, a United Methodist community in Shoreview, Minnesota. I'm Jason Steffenhagen, the lead pastor, and each episode will typically start with a sacred story reading coming from the Holy Scriptures, followed by the message that was given during our Sunday morning worship time. Any announcements for our community will come at the end of each episode, so stick around. If you are curious about learning more about Peace, United Methodist Community, you can go to peaceumc.com. Again, that's peaceumc.com. If you would like to find more episodes, you can find them on our website or go to our show page, which is peacethepodcast.podbean.com. Once again, that's peacethepodcast.podbean.com. We hope that you enjoy this episode. Please like, rate, review, subscribe. And now, on to the sacred story reading. Okay, now to the book of John. So this comes in John 15. This is part of kind of a long section where Jesus is giving instructions to the disciples. And this is towards the end where he's talking about being connected to the vine. I am the vine and you are the branches. And so we are the offshoots of this vine that's connected to Jesus. And we are required to produce fruit. And so this is what Jesus says towards the end of John 15, and this is verse 16 and 17. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Creator will give you. This is my command. Love each other. So as you are probably aware, we are in the midst of a series that we are calling Film and Faith, taking a look at a different film each week and kind of diving into, and these aren't like faith-related films. These aren't made by Angel Studios or something like that, where they're intended to be conversations on faith. These are regular old movies and films, some Oscar nominated, some are cartoons and whatever, and we're just talking about them and how they relate to being human, how they have connections to faith, and connections to themes that we can see in Scripture, and so we're just kind of diving right in. And today's movie is Toy Story 2, not 1. So if you watch Toy Story 1, you're welcome, but if you happen to get to the second one as instructed, also good. So we're talking a little bit about Toy Story 2, but before I dive into Toy Story 2, when I was growing up, the faith that I was handed in a way, the faith that was emphasized in my upbringing, was a more Calvinistic faith. And for some of you, you're like, oh yeah, Calvin, I get what he's talking about. And for others, you're like, that doesn't mean anything. I've heard the name Calvin before. I know it's related to some version of Christianity. Essentially, John Calvin was a theologian way back in the day, and he had a kind of core philosophy that God orchestrated everything. There's a way of reading the Bible that talks about how God appoints, acknowledges, has these special people that are called, and then the rest of humanity is not called. And so it's a really unique way of reading the Scripture, not one that I endorse, but it was one that is pretty popular in Protestant Christianity, and one that I was more or less raised in. And in that philosophy or in that theology, that strain of Christianity, there's this concept of understanding God's will, because you want to be in alignment with what God's will is. You do not want to fall out of the alignment with God's will. If you fall out of alignment with God's will, you are now acting contrary to God's will, and that may be a sign that you aren't one of the elect special people that get to go to heaven one day. And so your whole goal was to make sure that you stay within God's will at all times. It was a great way of curving behavior for a little ruffian 10-year-old. Do not swear. Do not get mad at your mom. Do not disobey your parents. Do not look at those magazines that other people are looking at on the school bus. Don't watch those kinds of movies. Why? Because you may be out of God's will. And that would be the most devastating thing imaginable. This philosophy carries through into young adulthood and even into the college years, because if you don't pick the right major and then get the right job, you may not be walking in accordance with God's will, and that would be devastating. It's really great that you want to teach kids about math, but that might not be God's will. And so be careful what you do for your major. I remember spending hours and hours praying, what is your will for my life, oh God? What do you want me to do? For the longest time, I was supposed to be the shortstop for the Minnesota Twins. That was God's will, I promise you. Except for the fact that, as this little church boy raised in a wonderfully loving, churchy home, everybody said, so are you going to be a pastor one day? And I was like, absolutely not. That is absolutely outside of God's will for my life. I promise you that is not going to happen. My best friend and I were both the churchy kids in the school, and everybody thought we were going to be pastors one day, and we both became marketing majors. He went into sales. I ended up working in higher ed as a pastor, and then now he's a pastor out in Delano. So I guess everybody was right about God's will for our life. But the problem is that it was anxiety-filled. And it was not one that was born out of curiosity. It was one born out of stress. It wasn't one that was invited into this wrestle of like, who are you and how are you made and how are you designed in order to bring good into the world? It was make sure you go down the right path or else you might be outside of God's will. And that was a really terrifying way to exist. Because calling and God's will are this weird enmeshed thing in some versions of Christianity. What I want to do today is take away the idea of finding God's will, because that's not the theology of this church. It's not the theology of Methodism. It's not the theology here at Peace. We're not a church that says there is one way in which to live this life, one path that you better be on or else. We believe that God is with all people at all times in all places, and God is up to all kinds of good in the world, and our job is to be moved by the Spirit to join God in the goodness and the reconciliation of all things. And that can be unique to all of us. As unique as we are, as unique as the stars, that is what God is up to, all the goodness. But calling is a little different. Calling is a little complicated, and calling is ongoing. Toy Story is a movie about identity and calling. You might not have thought that because you thought it was a movie about toys that come to life when the humans aren't looking, but it really is a story about identity. And then once you understand your identity, what's your calling within that identity? If you remember the most famous line from Toy Story 1, it's when Woody yells to Buzz Lightyear, "You are a toy, a child's plaything," because Buzz Lightyear thinks he's actually a space ranger. He thinks he came out of the box and is an actual space ranger. He thinks he can fly. And remember what happens in Toy Story 1? He jumps off the dresser, bounces off the bouncy ball, catches the fan around, flies through the air, bounces off something else, and lands perfectly on the bed next to everyone else. And they are all like, oh my goodness. And what does Woody say? That wasn't flying, that was falling with style, right? Because the whole point of Toy Story, the first one, is to understand what's your identity. What are you? Why are you here? Toy Story 2 takes a shift, because once the toys have all come together and they create this beautiful community, Buzz understands what he is, Bo Peep's there, you got the piggy bank, you got the dinosaur Rex, you got the little aliens who are amazing, you got all these wonderful characters doing life together, and they're helping Andy, the human, have this great play experience. And then Toy Story 2 comes along, and Andy's mom accidentally puts Woody in the bucket for the garage sale. And the toys are freaking out because now Woody's going to be sold at the garage sale. Andy's mom recognizes that Woody should not be sold at the garage sale, and even though someone's trying to buy him, and she says, no, that's all right. That is a family heirloom. That is a family toy. That is not for sale. She puts it in the cash box and shuts the lid on so Woody is presumably safe. Well, what we know is that Al from Al's Toy Barn comes along, opens up the cash box, steals Woody, throws him in his bag, and drives away. Because what we don't know is that Woody is actually an antique toy, and that when paired with the other antiques in his toy line, he becomes a very valuable toy, very hard to find toy, and one that's worth a lot of money to toy collectors over in Japan. And so Al is preparing Woody alongside Jesse and Bullseye and Stinky Pete the prospector to be sold to a collector. And so there's this question that comes up. Who is Woody? Who is Woody? What is he supposed to be? Because he recognizes that Andy's getting older. Andy's not playing with his toys all the time like he used to. Eventually, Andy's going to grow up and he's going to go off to school and he's going to put his toys in a box and they're going to go to the attic and they might not ever get played with again. And now Woody has this opportunity to be immortal, to be seen by people from all over the world who want to look at all these wonderful antique collectible toys. And he's enticed by that opportunity. And he's got this question: immortality or authenticity? Immortality or authenticity? Because Toy Story is about our identity and about calling. To unpack this a little bit further, and I'm just going to forewarn you, this is not one of those sermons where we're going to get super deep with Scripture. I promise that when we get into the fall, we are going to be doing some like super nerdy stuff where we're going to be diving into, I'm actually like, this is a little like, I'm going to try this. I'm going to do some research, but I kind of want to tackle Revelation. It was the one that got voted highest among all of you when I asked you what you want me to talk about. The 3 out of 36 people said Revelation. Everybody else said some other book of the Bible. There was no consensus whatsoever. But 3 of you said Revelation. So I bought 3 books on the book of Revelation, and I'm doing some reading, and that's the potential plan for the fall, is to do a series on Revelation. And trust me, we will have to get super dorky and super nerdy when it comes to trying to unpack that monster. So today is not that day. Today is not a super dorky day. But what I want to do is talk about calling and the uniquenesses of callings, how complicated calling can be, different stages of calling at different times in our life. And to do that, I want to look at some of the key characters in Toy Story 2 in order to unpack how we understand calling. So the first character we're going to look at is Buzz Lightyear. Buzz Lightyear is the space ranger. As you know from Toy Story, the first one, Buzz needed to try to figure out and understand his calling. Because understanding our calling and who we're meant to be and how we're designed in life can be a process. It's not something that we just wake up knowing one day. Sometimes it can be a hard thing to come to. Sometimes we think we're going to be the shortstop for the Minnesota Twins, and then we bat 180 in high school, and that dream dies very quickly. If you know baseball, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't know baseball, it basically means I couldn't hit worth snot. So that's the reality. I played baseball in college. And the first year, I told them I could play shortstop and pitcher. They said, after my freshman year, they said, we're going to have you keep pitching. You're done hitting. And I was like, fair enough. That's fine. Anyway, understanding our calling is the key. And it's a process, and it takes listening to people that we trust. Buzz didn't trust anyone else in that room that was telling him, you're a toy. And then he had to learn to trust Woody. And he had to learn to listen and acknowledge what was reality. He had to know his own strengths and weaknesses, that when he said he was flying, he was actually falling with style, not actually flying. And he actually had to look at, how am I really designed? Because he thought he had a laser cannon at the end of his hand, but what it turned out to be is just a blinky light that did nothing. Why? Because he's a toy. He's not a space ranger. So for some of us, it's a process to understand our strengths, our weaknesses, how we're made, what we're good at, what our interests are, where our passions lie. We have to understand how we're designed, the uniqueness of what it means to be you. And therein lies part of your calling. Second character I want to look at is Buzz's arch nemesis in the video game version of the Buzz Lightyear story, the evil Emperor Zurg. The Emperor Zurg is the sworn enemy of Buzz Lightyear. He's the leader of the Galactic Empire. It's kind of essentially Star Wars, but doesn't matter. And Buzz is trying to defeat Emperor Zurg. And when they actually face off in real life, what we end up finding out, like Star Wars, is that Buzz is Emperor Zurg's kiddo. And so, Emperor Zerg is an example of finding our calling eventually. Because Emperor Zerg was likely, I don't know the backstory of Emperor Zerg, so I'm just making this up. He was likely raised to be the galactic emperor. He was probably handed a narrative that said, this is your calling. This is who you're supposed to be, to dominate the galaxy and to put down any resistance whatsoever. And he was living into that calling with as much aplomb as possible. I bet you didn't have that on your bingo card for today, the word aplomb, but I used it. Anyway, eventually he figures out, actually, my calling is to be a dad. My calling is to play catch with my kid. And so at the end of Toy Story 2, you see one of the Buzz Lightyears, because now there's a whole toy line of Buzz Lightyears come to life, and one of the Buzz Lightyears is playing catch with his dad. And you can see him recognizing his calling. Sometimes the demands of life, sometimes the narrative that we're handed, sometimes the way that we see the world impacts who we are and what we do. And yet it's never too late to find your true calling. The question is, will you become bitter and angry and in opposition to the world, or will you remain open and curious? Thankfully for Buzz Lightyear, Zurg found his way to being open and curious, and he found his son. Speaking of the villains of the story, Stinky Pete, also known as the Prospector. Stinky Pete is kind of the comic relief of the Woody cartoon. He's the one that's always bumbling around doing the wrong thing. He's the one that blows himself up probably in every episode of the cartoon. He's the one that's purely there to be laughed at. And so when it came time to put the toys on the shelf, the hero Woody was sold quite often. The fun, spunky Jessie and her beautiful horse Bullseye were sold often, but Stinky Pete remained on the shelf, never to be purchased, never to be brought out of the box and played with by a child. Stinky Pete is an example of what Bonnie Miller McLemore calls a blocked calling. In her book, Follow Your Bliss and Other Lies We've Been Told About Calling, she writes about blocked callings. That there are people and situations in life where not because of anything you've done, but because of the society, the culture, the systems at work, you can't actually live into the calling that you have. We can look back throughout history, we can look at our time right now, and we can see so many examples of this. How many women were born for leadership but never given opportunity simply because society, culture, history said no? How many teachers during the COVID-19 pandemic wanted to teach kids and found themselves figuring out how to keep kids healthy? How many teachers, even more recently, wanted to teach a classroom full of kids and yet found themselves having to protect kids from federal agents? Sometimes the calling that we have gets blocked by society and culture and the world around us, the systems that are at work against us. Sometimes we don't have the opportunity to live into the calling that we have. As our world keeps people down and doesn't allow them opportunity to live out their full potential, people live a blocked call. Doors don't open, and we get left out. And the question becomes, well, what now? For Stinky Pete, he became both victim and villain at the same time. His blocked calling made him bitter and angry and made him into a victim and also the villain of the story, who wanted to be the one in charge. If he couldn't be played with, then he was looking for some autonomy, some form of power, some form of identity, and he found it by trying to be the one in charge of the group as they were about to be sold to the collector. But he could have remained open. He could have remained ready. He could have tried to find a new calling. But sometimes our blocked callings do a lot of damage in our lives. So when we are near people with blocked callings who can't live into their fullest potential, if they are victim and villain, let's remain open, knowing that life isn't the same for all of us. Then there's good old Woody. Sheriff Woody, the hero of the story at all times. Well, in Toy Story 2, as I talked about earlier, Woody has this tension. Do I live into immortality and become a collector's item, or do I find my way back to Andy? Do I go back with all of my toy friends who have come to rescue me? Do I go back and potentially get put in a box in the attic someday? And he begs the question, what happens when your calling changes? What happened when your calling changes? In that same book, Miller McLemore writes about relinquished callings. What happens when you reach a point in life where the calling that you've had for so long becomes a calling that needs to be let go of, needs to be put down, needs to be turned over to someone else. Sometimes this naturally comes with retirement. Sometimes this comes with the end of a person's life. Sometimes it comes because someone got voted out of office. Sometimes it happens and we don't want it to. What happens when we need to relinquish a calling? At some level, Woody knows deep down he's going to need to relinquish Andy. He needs to let him grow up, become a young adult, go off to college, start his own family. He knows that his calling is going to change, and he's going to need to become something new. And that ambiguity of becoming something new is where he finds himself at odds. He doesn't know what's next. He doesn't know where his place is. And so he's stuck trying to figure out the way forward. But he's got Jessie. Jessie's the cowgirl connection to Woody, and she has had her heart broken because she was left on the side of the road by a girl who ran off by accident and left Jessie behind. So Jessie's had her calling disrupted, and yet Jessie still has this beautiful purity of heart about making the most out of anything. She wants to go for it. She wants to live life to the fullest. And although she's had her heart broken, and although she's been left behind, and although she has been a little bitter and angry, she's also ready for the next thing, ready for the next adventure. She wants her and Bullseye to move on and to go forth. And I think Jessie's a great example of being open to God's calling. Because God's calling is complicated and messy, and it's unique, and it's different, and it changes, and it ebbs, and it flows. And Jessie's purity of heart and passion for life is a great example of what it means to be open to God's call, of saying yes and going for it. And then finally, there's good old Bullseye. You probably didn't see that one coming. Bullseye the horse. I think Bullseye is a perfect example of simple callings. We always talk about calling being this big thing. What's your career? What's your vocation? Right? What do you do for work? What do you do for life? And we have these big answers, right? Called to be a parent. I'm called to, go work at this job. I'm called to say these things or do this thing. And we try to have these big callings and see ourselves in light of the big call in our life. And yet there are simple callings all around us. The simple person that needs a hello on a Sunday morning. Someone that needs to have someone look them in the eye and say, no, how are you really? I know we're all supposed to answer fine or good or yeah, summer, woohoo. But really, there's more going on below the surface. And maybe you're called to just look a little deeper. Maybe when you see that person in the store making eye contact and asking how their day is, maybe using a person's name as opposed to, hey, how are you? But actually saying their name. Maybe it's picking up trash on the side of the road. Maybe that's your calling for today. Maybe that's it. Just make the world a little cleaner. All these little callings, all these little promptings of the Spirit, all these little movements and flows that move us and nudge us and push us in a direction that looks more and more like the kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. I think Bullseye is a perfect example of this because Bullseye is just simple. He's there to love Jessie. He's there to make her life better in whatever little way he can, whether that's nudging her in the cheek, whether that's letting her go for a ride, whether that's dancing with her on the record player, whatever it is, he's there for her. The simplicity of knowing that love is out there. It's all around, both the big and the small. But here's the thing about being human. We're actually all of these characters. We are the whole group. That's who we are. Sometimes we're a bullseye and we need to focus on the simple things. Sometimes we're Woody and our calling is changing. We got to figure out our new path, relinquish a calling that we've had. We need to be Jesse, searching after God's call for our life and recognizing it. We're all going to be Stinky Pete at some time. There's going to be a blocked calling and we're going to have to figure out, are we victim and villain, or are we going to remain open and curious? We need to be Buzz Lightyear, trying to understand our calling, and Zurg, that when we've been off and headed in a different direction, we need to be open to our calling when it finally smacks us right in the face. We are going to be all of these people. There's that beautiful line in Toy Story 1, "You are a toy." It's the defining characteristic of all these characters. It's who they are. And the person that gets to decide this with the most authenticity and gets to decide this with the most identity is Andy. Do you remember what he wrote on the bottom of Woody's boot? His name. Gosh, I get choked up over the stupidest stuff. You can go to the next slide. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Creator will give you. This is my command: love each other. Woody had Andy's name on the bottom of his boot. That's who he was. He wasn't simply a toy. He was Andy's toy. Here's what would be yelled at us if we were a character in Toy Story 1, if this life was that movie. You are a disciple. You are a disciple. Probably said with a little bit more compassion than Woody expressed to Buzz. A little less frustration and anger. But this is who we are. On the bottom of our shoe, it says Jesus. It says Creator. It says ground of all being is animating you. You're a disciple of love. You're a disciple of grace. You're a disciple of restorative justice enfleshed. That's who you get to be. That's our North Star, our guiding light, our orientation, our identity. And that gets to be our calling. So whatever you are called to in life, whether it's a vocation, career, parenting, whether it's the simplicity of picking up trash, saying hi to someone, whatever callings you are embodying in this moment, know that at all times you're doing so not as a random blip in the history of the universe, but as a disciple. Not because you chose it, but because God chose you. Let's pray. God, who's written their name on us, shape us and mold us. Help us to know ourselves well enough to know that you've uniquely designed us for good in this world, that you've given us beautiful things to do, both the big things and the small things. Help us to see our callings all around. Help us to move towards them. Help us to relinquish them when the time is right. Help us to embrace something new. Help us to embrace the big and the small alike. May we live into our calling not because we've chosen it, but because you've chosen us. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. Got a couple quick announcements before we dive into our service. First thing is that we've been saying this all summer long just to make sure that you are aware. Next week, we are not meeting here at 10 o'clock or 10:05 or 10:10 or whenever you want to stroll on in. We will not be here because we are meeting at 11:30 over at Turtle Lake down by the pavilion by the lake, and we are going to be doing a baptism service. It won't be a long service. We're going to have a few songs. I'll talk for about 5 minutes, and then we'll get right to the baptizing. And then after we're done, We're going to have the grills ready to go. And if you want to bring your own meat, bring your own meat to grill something up and bring a side to share. We'll bring the plates, the napkins, and all the utensils and whatnot, and some drinks. And then we'll just hang out by the lake for as long as you want. Well, I'm not going to be there for the whole time. I mean, if you stay until like 10 o'clock at night, I'm out, but you get it. So stay and enjoy a wonderful day at the lake over down at Turtle Lake. So that's going to be 11:30 this coming Sunday. So so set your clocks. Next announcement is that we still have some openings for our Peace Camping trip, the 31st through the 2nd. So that's the following weekend. That's a Friday into Sunday morning. If you have questions about it, come talk to me or Cassidy, and then you can sign up through the link that comes out in our midweek news. So if you haven't signed up for the midweek news, make sure that you sign up for that. That's where a lot of the links are for volunteering and different activities. All right, next announcement is we got the lineup of movies for the month of August. So for those of you that might be visiting for the first time, we've been looking at a different movie every week and how it connects to the topic of faith, our lives, who we are as human beings, and how we move about the world. And so we're going to be focusing on movies that are on Disney Plus, doing that out of convenience for you if you don't have that streaming service, instead of having you watch movies on Amazon Prime, HBO, Disney, Netflix, and you have to suddenly pay $80 in order to get all these things. It's all on Disney Plus this month. And so we're going to look at Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, which is the original first Star Wars movie, and then Moana, and then The Sound of Music, Remember the Titans, and then finally, we're going to end with Avengers Endgame. And yes, I know that Avengers Endgame is the 21st film in the original kind of Marvel Cinematic Universe saga. And so you're probably wondering, if I have not watched the first 20-some movies, am I going to be able to watch it? Probably not going to understand much of it. But I did put a link in an email that's coming out later this week that has a 16-minute, here's how you can get caught up so you're prepared for Avengers Endgame. It's still super confusing. I don't know how to help you, but we can talk through it before we get there. So anyway, you got about a month to watch 20 movies and then Avengers Endgame. How about that? And then finally, we are going to be doing a book study, a conversation on Wednesday, August 12th at 11:30. We'll meet over in the conference room there. And the book is Blood Over Brighthaven, which is a novel about a kind of dystopian situation where there's a community in the midst of a surrounding forest, and this community is trying to survive, and it's political, and it's weird, and it's kind of mystical in ways. It's definitely an entertaining book. It's fast-paced and fun, and also the themes are very, very resonant with our time now. So I highly recommend it. My wife was begging me to read this book this past winter, and I finally picked it up this spring, and I was like, oh my gosh, this book is awesome. I couldn't put it down. And so I was actually really sad when it was over. But it's one of those cool fantasy novels that is actually just that story. There's not like books 2, 3, 4, and 8. It's just one book, one story, has a beginning, has a beautiful conclusion. So you'll be pleasantly surprised by Blood Over Brighthaven. The plan is for you to read it, and then there's going to be a couple of conversations that take place in the book that I'm going to highlight for us to discuss. I mean, we can talk about the whole book, but there's a few really poignant conversations that I think are going to be really important for us. Thank you for listening to this episode of Peace, the podcast. If you would like to learn more about our community, go to peaceumc.com. Again, that's peaceumc.com. For more episodes of this podcast, you can go to our website or go to the show page, peacethepodcast.podbean.com. Again, peacethepodcast.podbean.com. May you experience the love of God, and may you have peace.